Okay, so welcome to the Historic Area Commission meeting on Thursday, May 12th. Let's just do a roll call of everyone present. So Laura Fontana.
Matthew Buckley.
Justin Day.
Lila Hammer.
So we do have 3 out of 5 commissioners, so we are able to conduct business. Maybe 4 out of 5. So the first order of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting on April 14th. So can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
A second.
Any discussion? Okay. So we'll approve as presented. Can I have a second on that?
A second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the minutes are approved. I do have a question about the applicant that were in the minutes.
Yes,
Have they moved
reached out.
forward and they're good?
They've moved forward. We had a meeting at my office with them and the architect earlier this week. They've reduced the footprint, they've reduced the height. We discussed further reduction of the height of the pitch. So I think it's gonna come down by 2.5 to 3 feet.
Okay.
And they've reduced the depth of the building from, you remember it was like 71 to
Right.
now it's gonna be like 61.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so working on that, it actually works out, they lowered the lower ceiling height to 8 feet, so a combination of all of those means becoming much more, it actually makes for a better elevation, like, oh, yes, it's like, yes, the rhythm works better.
Okay.
So the architect was gonna go back, look at a few more things that we talked about fixing, reducing even further more, and then circling back with revised updated plans.
Okay.
And then move forward. They even look at, they're waiting for the floodplain results and the foundation design to even say that they would prefer to avoid having the rear deck and just have a flat patio. So that'll be the concept that's gonna move forward. So I think it'll kind of meet a lot of the parameters that the commissioners mentioned
Right.
to go forth. for a while.
Okay. All right. Well, great to hear that. So
You're
happy
comfortable with it, with the.
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
way it's moving
Yeah,
forward. Yeah.
particularly based on also the approach and all the comments that we had done. And when we get it, I can just circulate for information.
Okay, good. All right, awesome. Thanks for the update. Okay, so we have one agenda item today, which is 161 East Second Street. So this is Phyllis Anderson here? Or are
She's
you?
not, she's my mother. I'm authorized to
Okay,
answer on her behalf.
and you are?
Shannon Anderson.
Okay, thank you. So Shannon, just tell us a little bit about the project.
Well, the foundation has moved since I purchased it. There's 2 mitigation there's 2 I-beams that were put in place, from what I understand, many years ago. And when we purchased the property, the foundation looked like it had stabilized. It hadn't moved in a while, and the foundation has started to move, particularly in the fall last year. You can clearly see the new crack. The window on the crawl space window, or the window that goes into the basement, actually the frame cracked and the window exploded in. So it has moved enough to actually bust out the window frame. So that's where I said, okay, let's see what we can do, because the city would have asked me to work on the outside of the house, and I had some misgivings about doing it until I had an engineer take a look at it. And because I don't want to invest in it if it's going to come down. So I was able to get an engineer in December. They took a lot of these are the photos. So really what spurred my action was the movement of the foundation. But I can tell you, I also lived in the house full time for 6 months and off and on after that. And when there's wind, the whole house moves. So there's definitely some framing issues. Probably they didn't make it to code back then, whenever they made it. So, if ultimately it's got a lot of issues, but I think the foundation is the nail in the coffin.
So just share those. What are you looking to do?
Right now, I just want authorization to, or hopefully you all won't object to me taking taking down the house. Once I have the house down, then I will look to either develop it, or if I can't afford to develop it, I'll end up selling the property, but I can't sell it with it as is. Plus, I think it's a hazard. I mean, so I would like to take it down, and then, my goal was to live there. I've lived in Philly. I've seen that property for over 20 plus years. And I was able to work something out to get it. So I would like to develop the property, but I can't really move on until I take it down from a financing standpoint, etc. But so that's it. I want to develop it, but I'm not guaranteeing that I'll develop it, but I'm down for the reasons I just mentioned.
Okay, so usually what we have is Leila just gives us an overview based on the historic guidelines, and then we'll ask additional questions. So,
Okay.
So based on the historic guidelines, anything that's either on the register or in the local or national, I said, based on the guidelines, anything that's either on the register or in the local or national historic landmark district, if there's demolition, it has to come to HAC for approval of the demolition.
Right.
Now, the parameters about the demolition is, the condition, whether it's an immediate hazard, whether it's repairable or not. The report that was provided by the structural engineer, and I don't know if this is structural engineer, I don't know, Mr. Fishburne, if you specialize in historic buildings or not, because often you can have a very different perspective from somebody who doesn't work in historic preservation. So he said there are primarily issues with the foundation. There's one foundation wall that's buckling. He said that the temporary repairs that were done, the steel beams aren't being as productive. The fact in some of the pictures, you can see that there's obviously been some displacement, which explains a little bit the cracks when the foundation wall, the upper levels. But he does keep on saying in his report that currently it should not be occupied, but that it should be either repaired and not occupied. At the end, he does say he puts a generic one sentence that says, because all of his recommendations, okay, are, and just based on the documentation we've gotten, right, is that their previous repairs, the recommended, they should be repairs to the foundation wall. The home has other significant framing issues that should be addressed. And then he says, the home is in danger, should not be occupied until the repairs are made. The recommended repair is to replace all the basement wall and to repair other structural issues. And then he goes, based on the overall condition, it should be demolished instead of repaired. So if there's a contradiction, like you should repair it, but it's so bad, you should tear it down. Now, I'm not here to second guess the structural engineer. I do know that when you look at things, there are ways to repair foundation walls, there are ways to strengthen, frames. And also one of the parameters that we don't have is, because it's also taken into consideration for standards for repair or demolition in the code in general, is like, what would the cost of those repairs be, even order of magnitude? Because typically HAC cannot look at dollar figures. When people come and say, I don't want to put wood windows, it's too expensive, we can't take into consideration financial considerations, because then we have to have people demonstrate that it's actually a burden. But there is a stipulation in the code, which is not so much HAC, but the standards for repair, vacation, or demolition of buildings, where it says that if you demonstrate that the repairs and the replacement will require up to 50% or more of the major components, then instead of reconstructing the entire building, the building can be ordered to be demolished. Now, this is when somebody's actually asking a third party to do it, but the same parameters are taken. Like typically when I have been involved in this kind of situation, we write a report, we give an order of magnitude repairs to do the structural repairs, so that you have the parameters to be able to judge whether we're reaching that 50% threshold for demolition versus, repairs. So in a sense, it may not be what you want to hear today, but there's not enough information just in the report to say this is catastrophic and needs to go, because he has reiterated in 3 different times that the building should not be occupied unless it is repaired, unless structural components can be repaired. And when you look at the picture, there are some areas, yes, the foundation, the fact that you'd need, particularly when it has moved back and is bulging, that you would need to perhaps do some things to relieve the hydrostatic pressure and rebuild it. But you look at overall the framing there, from the pictures that I saw, there really isn't a sense where you have a lot of bowing, all of the structure, cracks along all of the joints, a lot of distress of that nature. So I think I would say in order to make an approval based on these parameters, we'd have to have at least a narrative of what the repairs would be, and even if working with a contractor, an order of magnitude estimate to be able to see. Again, he's saying obviously not safe to occupy, understand that, but he does recommend 3 or 4 times a repair, which means he did not clearly state this is beyond any repair. So from that perspective, I'd say additional information, if one were to have an order of magnitude from third party working with you saying, you know, what do you think it would cost? This is one of the few cases where the cost of repair versus is one that what can be taken into consideration as one of the parameters. And since the city and the code allows that, I think it's reasonable to say that HAC can consider that. Now, in terms of significance, it's a contributing building. It has a lot of, you know, original, you know, feature. We can only look at the outside. We don't really look at the level of significance. And, you know, it's sort of a common typology that's around, but there's just not enough in this simple report to be able to say absolutely based on that, there are enough parameters to okay a demolition.
Okay. Is that the,
No, this is, I mean, they'll be asking questions. This is my
Okay.
professional opinion as the architect
okay,
to HAC advising it.
So what we're saying is that in this case, we would look at cost of repairs versus, you know, if they're significant for repairs, that is a opportunity to look at the demolition. side.
Because the code has that when it's building that it needs to be vacant, you know, which is kind of another
Right.
component. I think because of the nature of this building, because it's a contributing, it would be something else. We were talking, for example, somebody said, you know, it's the courthouse or it's City Hall. and, you know, we have-
Right.
But also because the report says multiple times, this can be repaired, this must be repaired. It's only at the end, there's one sentence that says the recommended repairs to replace all the basement. And then there's ones that based on the overall condition of the home, it should be demolished instead of repaired. There would need to be a little bit more rationale to why suddenly at that last sentence, it's saying based on everything, it should be demolished versus repaired. And that you could say is it because the extent of the repairs is because you consider that there's, and you'd have to demonstrate that there's a structural failure, not just at the foundation walls, but it's gone through, you know, the framing of the first floor, the framing of the second floor. Are there other issues happening? So documenting that and explaining the concerns, which would then have the counterpart of saying in order, and I'm not saying have a contractor do like a 20-page estimate, but at least document. And then you take into consideration what you need to do to sort of disassemble the finishes, to reassemble the finishes if you're doing joist repairs and primary and secondary beam repairs. So I think in terms to make an informed decision, it's important to have that information.
okay. Any additional comments or questions?
Are you able to get a estimate for that?
Yeah. Okay, so that was very, very difficult to get anybody even to take a look at it. Everybody walked it. You all familiar with Dave Manis? Rocky built some houses there in Old Newcastle. Dave Manis's home. He actually, I finally was able to get him to come and take a look at it. He said, I don't even want to be in here. And I asked him if I could quote that. He said, yeah, he said, I'm definitely not interested in repairing this house. It needs to be torn down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he didn't even want to, I can't get anybody to bid on it. It's, you know,
Well, could you have your structural engineer write a narrative of what he thinks those different repairs would be? And then typically, either engineers or designers, they do order of magnitude estimates. He could tell you, based on this example, based on what we're seeing, this would be an order of magnitude. That's what we typically do.
order of
We don't have
magnitude is the key phrase.
Yeah, because we're not asking for a detailed estimate, but we are asking for a number that he'd be willing to vouch and sign off saying, if you were to do these repairs, this would be the conceptual cost estimate. We call it order of magnitude because an actual estimate, you would have to go to the point where you had, you know, design elements and you had more information. But at least something that's an element. And when he does that, he has to develop a bit of a narrative of explaining. It can be a bullet list. Oh,
You know what? I'll just put it on the phone. This is a.
Oh, okay.
This is a-
Well, high tech.
Yeah, so,
So a bullet list narrative, you know, of the elements and the scope that he thinks would be required, because he obviously went in and took all these pictures and was in the house and all that. So he should be able to do a descriptive narrative of his recommended repairs and provide you with an order of magnitude estimate to conduct those repairs.
I mean, I guess we can't do anything without that, but.
Yeah, and I mean, if he has questions, I'd be more than happy.
Okay.
You know, if he says, well, what is she really looking for? If he's worked on historic buildings, it should be fairly straightforward. If he has questions, I won't give any opinion on what he proposes because he's proposing and signing off. So my place is not to say it should or should
Mhm.
not be. It's just to say, let's give us all the elements of information so can then the commission can make an informed decision.
Order of magnitude evaluation
estimate.
proposal?
So a narrative, a bulleted narrative description of the scope of work, which means beefing up a little bit what he's saying there, particularly since he's talking not just about the foundations, but the other elements. I would say clarify the rationale for demolition, which currently is only stated at the end as a one sentence. And then the last item, use that concept, use that narrative, that bulleted narrative to develop an order of magnitude cost estimate. So we may have an understanding of what the impact, the financial impact of the repairs would be. And I'm not prejudging the result.
So I've actually spoken to another engineer
Mhm.
who evaluated the property. I guess without this, I'm just not saying anything more or
I mean, it's,
sort of superfluous or.
No, I
no,
know.
I
it's
mean,
always, it's
he
always
wanted
good to have
Chat, I
information.
mean, we're here to chat
Okay,
about it too,
okay.
so please do. Yes.
Yeah, so apparently there was somebody who prior to my purchase had an engineer come and took a look at it. He wanted to charge me additional for producing that report, and his was actually more descriptive, but rather even more scathing. We talked about it, and he said, and the phrase they used was not economically feasible, okay?
And he's not willing to share that without compensation, as it was an updated report.
No,
Unfortunately, that's the kind of documentation that you would need to be able to justify a decision of saying, okay.
I may, I paid a little bit for this one too. I may be able to get them to update it as well, so I'll attempt that, but I mean, if we need additional, it's gonna be besides that, it'll be very difficult for me to get a contractor to seriously take a look at it, so.
Yeah, and you don't, when it's, as I said, when we've done reports, when I've done reports like these in the past for clients, I'll sometimes, if I want to run my numbers with a contractor, I will just, but if not, I've also done them based on experience and estimates. And we all have access to RS means and estimating books,
Yeah.
because when we work with clients, you don't always work with a contractor.
Yeah, okay, well, I mean, and so the engineers, the two that I spoke to, they said, look, it's a matter of money. Can you repair it? Yeah, you can put a lot in, so, and
And
then
if they're
repair it,
comfortable-
right?
yeah.
But it's not economically viable.
And if
so-
they're comfortable telling you that, they should be comfortable saying that in a paper with a
Okay.
signature, giving the order of magnitude.
Right, like that language is what we're.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Fair enough.
And then, because then they're putting their, as I said, my role is never to look at pictures and say, hey, but to your point, in my world, this is what I do. So yes, there are many things that can be repaired,
Right,
unless somebody professionally says this is, and by the way, this is what the cost will be, and then we can have like a conversation.
okay, if they're willing to, all right, the cost order of magnitude.
The order of magnitude cost estimate, and you can give them, I don't know, I can give you my
Yeah.
business card, I'll give it to you, they can reach
Okay,
out to me,
perfect.
and we can have this conversation.
Yeah, and,
Jeff's not here.
No.
yeah, I mean, so Jeff's been there, and
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I had a question for Jeff, but he's.
okay. So, and then, yeah, we go to him and put in a permit. I haven't bothered doing any of that because I just wanted to get see if, get this approval or.
Yeah, I mean, we just need that additional report with the additional information. You don't,
You know.
you're still coming as a consult, right? So don't worry,
Okay,
and we would like to
Because
then
also,
get you on next month's meeting so we can make a decision about that.
because you'll need the permit, and when the permit comes, then they'll be aware of it, they'll have seen the pictures, we'll have the additional information, and we'll be able to decide one way or the other.
so when I put in for the permit, it has to come back here as well, or?
It's,
It's a high permit, right?
the HAC, yeah, because HAC has to sign off on it. Since there isn't a permit per se yet in place,
Mhm.
this is considered a consultation. But yes, as soon as a building permit is submitted, then it has to come to HAC to get
Okay.
their certificate. So it'll be part of the normal process.
So
And-
next month, I
Yeah.
can buy or produce the documentation you're looking for.
And-
Comes up in June, and then if you guys say, okay, then I'll
go
put in the
for the permit.
permit, and then the following month, there'll be a.
No,
No, then
that'll be done.
you're done. After next
Okay.
month.
Normally, if you're ready for the permit next month and you present it concurrently, then you're ready to go.
Ready to go.
What I would say is, if you want, you can send me the documentation, have it before the next hack meeting,
Yeah,
so that I can look at it and converse with you and your engineer and say, hey,
Perfect.
can you beat this up? Can you, again, I won't talk about the recommendation, I'll just say in terms of the information available,
okay.
we have that.
They seem to be pretty flexible. so-
Good, so that when you come to hack, at least you have the information that's needed, and then I can sort of
Okay.
share it and they can vote on it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, when it's done, remind me, I'll give you a card if I have one, if not, I'll just shoot you an email.
Or,
Yeah, as long as we get the proper notification. Just out of curiosity, when you bought the home, what was your vision?
So I don't want to be the guy that tears down that old house, right?
No, that's okay.
Right,
Right, right.
if my vision, so let me say what it's not.
Right.
If my vision were to have torn it down, I would have immediately put in an application. Now, I lived in it for 6 months, off and on after that. So my vision was to incrementally improve it
Okay,
over time.
sure.
The back half of the house would have had to have come down. It's not even definitely the shed on the back of it, or the shed. So, it was my intention to sort of incrementally improve it.
Okay.
The movement was pretty scary, in some of those windstorms there, and I don't recall some of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but then, I was in the building when that moved and that window cracked, so. So my vision was to repair it,
Okay. No, I was just curious.
yeah.
Yeah, I own Jessup's, and when we bought it, it was a mess as well. And, I think what it comes down to is before we, we're trying to save these places, but up to the end of where they can't be. I mean,
Right.
it's just sort of like a peace of mind thing. I'm sure many people would love to just tear them down. That's not obviously not what your
Yeah,
intention was. So
no,
we're just trying to, before we let it go, let's make sure it's really gone.
I mean, you guys got $1 million and want to help you invest in it,
Right.
I have no problem.
Well,
That's why I'm here, is because of, it's
But
one of
also
the 3
because-
colonial towns in the country, right?
Yeah,
So,
it's just,
And to Justin's point, when you look at the images, and I think Marika you can share the Google Drive, I guess, with the members of the commission, right?
I can send it out.
Yeah.
Well,
you-
actually, what I had to do was download everything because it wouldn't connect to go out as an email.
And I can actually, if not, I can actually do a file transfer, thing where we can just
Are you
share
talking
our.
about face?
Yeah,
Oh,
so because when you look at a lot of the close-ups, a lot of the close-ups are good, but a lot of the close-ups aren't showing something catastrophic from the perspective, other than the foundation issue. Because it's typical of a building, this age, and to the point that this is the same thing.
Sorry.
So I think having that additional articulation about how,
yeah, the foundation puts it over the top for me to be able
Oh,
to.
sure. I mean-
And I'll just leave it at that. I mean, if
just. out
if
of-
you guys want the house and want to take it and move it, I just can't afford to.
no, it's just like I was able to fix
Right.
my place, and it's sturdy, especially if it was commercial. But if it wasn't, it wouldn't have been, and that would be an even bigger tragedy, but, it's still, be really ashamed if somebody rushed to tear a place down, and now I've 25 years of beating it up with people, it's doing fine, so that's all we're saying is, before we let it go,
and do ask him also actually to elaborate a little bit on his experience with buildings of this type and this, this age and things like that, because that also helps. I'm just talking about all the elements that PAC members will take into account when you look at the report. I think that's also makes the thing.
funny feeling, you're absolutely correct, however, let's.
Yeah,
do it- let's do
show it.
Just
do it.
because,
Yeah.
in the time that, my question to Jeff was, when was the last time that Hack let a demolition? I don't know. I was just curious, have we ever let a house go to demolition? And I didn't know, I don't know the answer.
I've had lengthy conversations with Jeff, and it's happened. I understand there was even some that happened in an emergency while he was gone.
Well, there've been some
yeah,
places
yeah.
not demolition by neglect where people did nothing,
Yeah.
and then come and say, oh my gosh, this is catastrophic, which is unfortunate when that happens. And that's where actually some of the code. friends are to
Right.
try to avoid.
So
that
I was
and
just
mitigate that.
curious about that. And then if in this type of situation with the demolition, I've heard different things where, and I don't, these were people telling me, but like, oh, even if we allow a demolition, they have to keep the front wall. Is that correct?
No, that's if you're doing a facetectomy, which
Okay.
is like you're removing everything, you're coming back, and you're keeping the front elevation. I think those typically work much better if you're doing brick or stone masonry, because you can actually stabilize the facade and kind of rebuild everything behind. With this type of building and structure, it's not practical. It's like, it's like a combination of sticks.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just.
Not as feasible. On the other hand, you said you purchased it.
When?
Yeah. When?
Yeah, the week COVID kicked in, it closed and everything shut down.
And the
That was
presale-
March of
2020.
2020.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see what the pre-sale inspection report said about the house.
So,
Because
I
that's
mean-
normally a snapshot in time too.
yeah, I mean, I didn't hire an engineer, but they,
Did you do a home
mortgage
inspection?
company.
Just to
yeah.
keep-
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I wonder what the
So-
pre-sale inspection report
You know,
showed.
look, I mean, clearly, I'm not born yesterday. Clearly, there had been work to stabilize the
Mhm.
foundation, and if that work is done properly, then you shouldn't see any movement. There was no movement, and I've later learned that's been there almost 30 years. So I felt pretty comfortable with that, although maybe someone else didn't. So, but as you can see, I don't know, maybe the photograph there,
Yeah, I
you'll
think
see
there was
it.
some, yeah.
You can start to see the white of it, and then literally it exploded that window.
Was someone living in it prior to you buying?
On and off.
On and off,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know the exact issue, but I think they had somebody remotely that would come in from Hawaii and live there and, you know,
Hence the Maui on the wall.
Yeah, I saw
yeah.
that in one of the pictures.
So I mean, it turned out, it worked out well for me, because with COVID, I immediately moved from New York, moved down there that week, and then escaped from New York, and we lived there for 6 months straight, and then off and on since then, so.
And I think,
But,
Is this the window? This is the one you're talking about?
yeah, that's the frame.
Oh, yeah.
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 And, yeah, I mean, this was not there.
it was probably incipient and then suddenly
Right, and-
it reached beyond the equilibrium and it's cracked apart.
Yeah, and when the gap between here and there, that's, he has a photo of the,
Where you put a screwdriver under.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I
it's
saw
like 4 inches or more between that and then it actually connects with the wall here, so it's good 30, 20, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I saw a
And,
picture.
and again, that didn't scare me, because
It was still there.
yeah. So
I mean, that's one of the things, like when you have the gaps, that's where, if you don't shim those gaps over time, that also increases the fragility because it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing to carry the load. So it's kind of like a whole sequence. And I want to spare everybody, I get excited about the stuff, but I do want to spare
Yeah.
everybody the details.
Yeah, no, I mean, one thing it leads to another in this
Right.
type of situation too.
and
Look, I've been in this house when it
I'm
was
sorry?
up for sale. I've been in it when it was up for sale and I was scared to be in it. So I
Okay.
can appreciate
All right,
that
well,
a little
I mean,
bit.
so,
I was a little nervous,
okay,
but,
well,
but,
that's what's scary.
but then I had heard,
This
it's
is
a
what-
historic home and, I knew it was gonna require a lot of, we were
Right.
interested in it too, but I knew it was gonna require a lot of work. So I was concerned about that.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? I don't know if this may help Mr. Anderson too, just from my own information. So when a demo happens in a city, what's the impact to the neighbors? I mean, taking into account those kinds of things. I mean, because the one house is actually both houses.
Well, there's a brand new house being built
Yeah,
next
yeah,
to you.
yeah.
Well, so let's talk about the impact of that on my house.
Okay,
So
yeah.
once I knew that was approved, I wanted Jeff to come in and take a look at it.
Right.
To say, hey, look, this is where I'm at, and I'm worried that if they start building next door, I don't know what type of foundation they're gonna put in.
Mm.
If it reduces, I'm not an engineer, but
And normally, to your point, contractors are supposed to be very careful when they do the work to not come and have any, they shouldn't be doing enough earth movements without putting any kind of structural intermediate things, because they don't want to destabilize the houses next door. And that is always a potential aspect, particularly if you have previously weakened. So there is that aspect. For the demolition, on the other hand, sort of hack, when you look at things, you don't, The only impact is more from a permit and a technical perspective. That you have to be careful when you're doing that much and not to, disturb the adjacent homes, not to do anything of that nature.
In while I haven't talked to the new development owner personally, I've spoken with the contract. I try to get him to take a look into it now. But I talked to him, they had asked permission to go onto our property to do work. I said, quid pro quo, so at least verbally through their contractor, they've indicated that it shouldn't be a problem. So I suppose they would be helpful in tearing it down in terms of doing whatever I need to do or.
And one of the things that it's not necessarily stipulated, but it's always like, often you can ask for mitigation, and mitigation would be okay before it's torn down, take some really, there are things that like take the picture, documented, but then again, Newcastle doesn't necessarily have, but like documenting and leaving archives, for example, maybe the Historical Society or something like that, that you document what was there. Those are other kinds of mitigations that can be asked, that can be put as conditions. If it were to go the route, I'm not saying it will, but if it
Yeah,
were. those
I
are
mean,
conditions
look,
I'd say.
Frankly, if I'm gonna have, if ultimately, maybe we should discuss, but if it's not gonna be approved, I'm gonna lose the house, right? I won't be able to afford to fix that house up or get the funding for that, but I should be able to develop it. So,
And let's see what the documentation says, let's see what the record, and then after that, there's always a process of like, it goes to HAC, and then there are other processes, if there's another way you want it, there are other processes to appeal decisions. But I think it's important, to Justin's point, because a lot of what makes Newcastle special is these small little historic homes. Let's do it the justice, and do you justice of documenting conditions and then going
well,
from there.
that's why I'm here, right? Yeah, plain and simple.
All right, so just so we make sure that we've provided you enough information of what we're looking for, so I guess you wrote some things down that Leila had mentioned. I'm sure she'll share with you her information. And
Yeah, I
so
gave it to
what's great is that, you can do the consulting before the next meeting, so that when the next meeting comes, we have all the information, additional information in advance of that meeting. And then it should go a little bit smoother, the process out of whatever the outcome is. So we can ask more
Yeah.
questions, we'll have more information.
I'm pleased with the results for tonight. Now I know what we need to do. It wasn't.
The pictures are good, and I think they'll share them, and I appreciate
Yeah.
that all of them Maddie took, and then that gives us time to look at the pictures ourselves as well and prepare more questions and then get the additional documentation.
Yeah, because that was on the request. The other things I would recommend, if you can do this, because the next meeting is in a month, the agenda is put out, 7 to 10 days before. It would be helpful to have something that's pretty close, like the week before, because that's the kind of thing it would be good to send out to HAC members so they can read it and be familiar with it before the
Yeah.
meeting.
I'll take immediate action on getting it. Hopefully I can get it this week. Depends on what Mr. Fishburne's schedule is, right?
Yeah, because our next meeting is June 9th, so we get our agenda on June 2nd. So all the information has to be back to.
Do I
City
need to
office
fill out
before
another
No,
application?
you'll just
How do
provide
I-
the additional information to.
How do I get
the
on the
city.
schedule then?
Marika you're gonna work with Marika again?
Yeah.
She was the one,
I'll-
you dropped something on the other
Yeah.
side.
I'll
Um,
be ready. So
Sure,
if you can
yeah.
put me on it. One way or the other, I'll get Mr. Fishburne or I'll contact that other engineer and have
Once we
something.
get the papers, we can do. I don't usually finish up the.
Yeah, we get the agenda the week before, so
Okay.
as long as
So-
you get her the information, you'll get on that agenda.
One question. I'm sorry, just one question, Marika. This has been put forth in terms of coming to HAC as a historic review certificate, not as a consultation. Does that mean that in terms of how you document, does it need to be?
So we're
stated
gonna
where you're
table
going?
it for, yeah, so we'll make a motion
So
to
that-
table for
So that way you're
Thursday.
still in the loop and,
So this way we're doing our process and it gives you more time.
Okay.
yeah.
Continue to do what we just discussed.
Yeah,
Exactly. No, that doesn't change.
Yeah, so we're going to,
Yeah, because it was an application
Um,
for demolition, so we need to make sure that you're processed appropriately
yeah,
in the minutes, so we can keep on having this
so
conversation.
by tabling it, we give the applicant more additional time to provide additional information
Mhm.
required by us. for additional review no later than 10 days prior to the next. So you have to get us the information no later than 10 days prior to the next scheduled meeting.
Okay.
And include it in the agenda. So we're gonna make, I'm gonna make a motion to table 161 East Second Street. Can I have a second on that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So that gives you the official process then
Okay,
is in place.
thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Card, and we'll-
Yeah, reach out to me. I'm around.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? Well, we appreciate you coming in. We appreciate the information. I think a little bit more documentation, then, we can make the decision. And it also just helps us so that if anybody ever comes back to us to ask the questions, we have our documentation in order to, for whatever decision we make. So it helps everybody all around. All right, if there's no other questions, looks like there's nothing else on the agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
We'll look forward to
Very-
seeing you next month.
Look forward to hearing from you.
Night all.
Good night.